we are seeing signs of maturity across the entire landscape and definitely for Netflix as well. So, moderating revenue growth is definitely a big red flag here. And we've seen the revenue growth actually come down pretty substantially, which is what I think is really spooking investors, right? Because in the first quarter, you had about 16% revenue growth, almost 14% for the second quarter. And now when you look at their guidance for the third quarter, it's 11.7%, which was well below what consensus was expecting. So this really, I think, feeds into that whole investor anxiety about what the catalysts are going forward for this name.
And this is not something that can be solved with more spending on content and making sure you have the latest hot show or the latest franchise, is it?
Well, they actually, Scarlett, to that point, they're actually boosting content spending pretty significantly this year, almost 10% to $20 billion. That's the highest ever that they would be spending on content. But, if you look at the engagement report, which they published yesterday, yes, they do have, this very broad swath of content. But at the end of the day, we're not necessarily seeing that resonate into what the metric that all investors are focused on, which is engagement. Because while the total number of hours viewed did grow slightly, 2% from last year, the viewing hours per subscriber is actually declining. And the big worry, I think, for investors is that as we get disruption from short form video, from YouTube, from, Instagram, TikTok, and all of these other social media platforms, can Netflix actually retain that, engagement metric? And is it only going to slip further?
So, Geetha, do you think we're heading towards a more consolidation in streaming, maybe as companies chase scale and profits?
I think we already saw that, right? So Netflix actually did go after Warner Brothers Discovery streaming and studio business last year pretty aggressively until they finally lost to Paramount Skydance. I think, at this point, yes, Netflix is doing little things, whether it's adding, short form content, whether it's going into live events, whether it's, doing a little bit more in gaming. But none of these are transformative enough. We need some kind of a step change catalyst here, and we're really not seeing anything. So maybe M&A, maybe some kind of a transformative partnership, maybe some kind of a big acquisition will finally move the needle for Netflix, but we have to wait and watch.
That's so interesting. And I know this is something you've written about, Geetha, this idea that Netflix now has M&A ambitions when it had kind of denied that it was looking to do that. It's always prioritized organic growth and reinvesting in its own business. What does that say about the state of the streaming wars overall, that Netflix needs to buy to consolidate its grip on the market?
Yeah, I mean, we're really seeing competition kind of intensifying, and we're going to see that only intensify further, Scarlett, once Paramount closes on its acquisition of, Warner Brothers and HBO. And Netflix really needs to kind of beef up the content because obviously it's the lack of those breakout hits. Yes, they did have great content. They did have a great pipeline. Yes, we did see good growth in viewing hours, but that's just not enough. As we have more and more of, it's not just competition in streaming, though. That's the problem. It's competition from all kinds of platforms. We talked about the social media platforms, and that's really what Netflix has to kind of defend its turf against. And for that, they have to come up with bigger, better, more engaging content. And they might very well need to buy a studio for that.
What about the live sports, podcasts, and ads initiatives? How meaningful are those when it comes to driving growth? Are you bullish on them? I feel like Scarlett and I were talking about it, and almost everyone has a podcast these days.
Yeah, so on the margin, I think it definitely helps because, at the end of the day, Netflix is, something you go home to in the evening and then you're watching it. But I think with podcasts, it's something that they're trying to build on through the day, right? They're trying to build on engagement. Anytime you pick up your phone, you have some content that you can kind of listen to or look at. And that is really what they were trying to go after. But again, it's on the margin. Yes, it helps, but doesn't move the needle.